What happens when a man who has everything is forced to confront everything he threw away? For tech billionaire Nathaniel Pierce, a man who traded love for legacy, that moment came on a Tuesday night. He was sitting in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, dripping with success, with a stunning new woman on his arm. He thought he was untouchable, but then he saw her. Across the opulent room, clearing away the plates of the wealthy, was his pregnant ex-wife. What he did next wasn't what she expected. It wasn't what his girlfriend expected, and it certainly wasn't what he expected of himself. This isn't just a story of regret, it's a story of reckoning. Nathaniel Pierce surveyed the dining room of l'Orangerie with the practiced ease of a king surveying his court. The soft clinking of Christofle silverware against Bernardaud porcelain was the evening's background music, a symphony of wealth, to which he held the conductor's baton. Everything in his life was curated, selected for its perfection from the vintage Bordeaux, swirling in his glass to the woman seated across from him. Serafina Dubois was by any metric flawless. Her raven hair was sculpted into a chignon so severe it dared a single strand to misbehave. A diamond necklace, a casual gift from him last month, glittered at her throat, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. She was beautiful, intelligent in a cutting, cynical way, and she understood the transactional nature of their relationship perfectly. She provided beauty, an arm candy, an accessory to his success, and he provided a lifestyle that was the envy of her thousands of social media followers. It was a clean, uncomplicated arrangement. It was safe. "Darling, you must try the seared scallops," Serafina murmured, her voice a low purr. She held a forkful out for him. Her scarlet-painted lips curved into a practiced smile. "They're simply divine." Nathaniel obliged the taste of the sea and butter exploding on his tongue. It was exquisite, like everything else in his life. He had built Pierce Innovations from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. He had a penthouse that overlooked the entire city, a fleet of cars he rarely drove, and a net worth that fluctuated in the 10-figure range. He had achieved everything he had set out to do. He had sacrificed for it. He'd told himself, the sacrifices were necessary. "It's good," he agreed, his eyes scanning the room again. He recognized half the patrons, banking titans, rival tech, CEOs, old money scions. They nodded at him, a gesture of respect among predators. This was his world, a world of power and influence. A world he had chosen. The memory, unwanted and sharp, pricked him. "Is this all you want? Nate numbers on a screen dinner, with people who don't even know the color of your eyes," Amelia's voice. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He hadn't thought of her in months. Or rather, he had actively not thought of her. Amelia Rosewood, his ex-wife, the woman who represented the life he'd left behind, the life of messy emotions, of shared dreams that didn't involve stock options, of quiet Sunday mornings and burnt toast. A life he'd deemed a distraction, an anchor holding back the rocket ship of his ambition. Their divorce had been finalized a year and a half ago. It was acrimonious, not because of money. He'd given her a settlement so generous his lawyers had paled, but because of the things that couldn't be quantified. He remembered her face in the lawyer's office, pale and drawn, not with greed, but with a profound, soul-deep disappointment. She hadn't fought for more money. She had simply looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Nate, are you listening to me?" Serafina's voice cut through his reverie, sharp with impatience. "I was telling you about the Hamptons. We absolutely must rent the beachfront property this year. The one with the infinity pool. The photos would be incredible." "Of course," he said, the words automatic. "Have my assistant arrange it." He was pushing the memory of Amelia away, locking it back in the box where it belonged when his gaze drifted toward the service station, near the kitchen. A busser was carefully stacking dirty plates onto a trolley, her movements methodical and weary. She was wearing the restaurant's drab, ill-fitting uniform, a black polo shirt and black trousers. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple, messy ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face that was devoid of makeup and etched with fatigue. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. This woman was a world away from the vibrant, laughing Amelia he had once known. But then, she turned slightly under the light, pushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead, and his world tilted on its axis. It was her. It was Amelia. His heart didn't just sink. It plummeted, a stone dropped into an icy abyss. She was here, working, in a place like this, clearing tables for people like him. The generous settlement. What had happened to it? What had happened to her? And then he saw it. It wasn't just the ill-fitting uniform. The polo shirt was stretched taut over a pronounced, unmistakable swell. Amelia wasn't just tired and working as a busser. She was pregnant. Very pregnant. The fork in Nathaniel's hand slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the pristine white plate, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. Every head turned in their direction. But Nathaniel couldn't see them. He could only see his ex-wife, his pregnant ex-wife, hoisting a heavy tray of dirty dishes, her back slightly arched to compensate for the weight in front of her. The weight of a life he knew nothing about. Across the table, Serafina followed his shocked gaze, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitted together in confusion, then her eyes widened in dawning malicious recognition. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. Well, she whispered, leaning forward conspiratorially, her voice a venomous hiss. Look what the cat dragged in. I guess some people just don't know how to manage their money. Or their lives. The blood drained from Nathaniel's face. The room felt like it was closing in the air, thick and unbreathable. He was looking at the ghost of his past, and she was carrying a future that felt like a judgment. Time seemed to warp and stretch. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Nathaniel's ears. He was frozen, a statue of a man carved from shock and ice. Amelia hadn't seen him yet. She was focused on her task, her movements economical, betraying a deep physical exhaustion that twisted a knife in his gut. How? The question screamed in his mind. The settlement had been more than enough for her to live comfortably for a decade, to start a new life, to do anything but this. He had written the check himself, a final clean severance. He'd seen it as a closing of a chapter, a magnanimous gesture to salve his own conscience. He'd imagined her moving to a quiet town, maybe opening the small bookstore she'd always dreamed of. Not this. Never this. Is she a waitress? Serafina asked, her voice laced with a faux pity that was more insulting than outright scorn. She took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes glittering with amusement over the rim of the glass. How dreadful for her. And pregnant too. Tetsk, tetsk. Some women really let themselves go after a divorce. Her words were like acid, burning through the fog of his shock and kindling a hot, defensive anger. He didn't know why he felt the need to defend Amelia. He was the one who had left her. But Serafina's casual cruelty was abhorrent. Be quiet, Serafina, he said, his voice low and dangerous. She raised an eyebrow, surprised by his tone. Darling, I'm just making an observation. It's rather pathetic, don't you think? You trade up to a masterpiece, she gestured to herself, and the rough draft ends up here. It's almost poetic. Before he could retort, the moment he dreaded arrived. Amelia finished loading her trolley and turned her gaze sweeping absently across the room. Her eyes met his. The recognition was instantaneous. For a fleeting second, a flicker of the old Amelia, surfaced surprise, a hint of a remembered warmth. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of weary composure. Her eyes, the same warm hazel eyes that had once looked at him with such adoration, became flat and guarded. She saw him. She saw the opulent table, the expensive wine, and the immaculately dressed woman beside him. She took in the entire scene in a single painful glance. A flush of color rose on her cheeks, a mixture of shame and defiance. She gave him a curt, almost imperceptible nod, the kind one gives a stranger who holds a door open, and then she turned away, intending to push her heavy trolley toward the kitchen. The sight of her turning her back on him, of her trying to disappear, broke his paralysis. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't sit here in his $1,000 suit and watch her perform manual labor while carrying a child. It felt like a scene from a nightmare, a karmic indictment of his entire life. "Excuse me," he muttered to Serafina, pushing his chair back abruptly. "Nathaniel?" "What are you doing?" she hissed, grabbing for his arm. "Don't make a scene. It's beneath you." He shook her off his movements, stiff. "I'll be right back." He intercepted Amelia just as she reached the swinging doors of the kitchen. "Amelia," he said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. She stopped, her back still to him. Her shoulders were tense. "Nathaniel," she replied, her tone perfectly, even devoid of any emotion. "Please, I'm working. What are you doing here?" "The money I gave you." She finally turned to face him, and up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the faint lines of stress around her mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. But her gaze was steady, her pride a shield. "I'm earning a living," she said simply, "which is what I need to do right now. Now, if you'll excuse me, my manager doesn't appreciate long chats with the customers." She made to move past him, but he blocked her path. He couldn't process it. His mind was a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, and a strange, unwelcome surge of possessiveness. "No, wait. This is ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing this, especially not in your condition." He gestured awkwardly toward her stomach. A flicker of fire lit her eyes. "My condition is none of your concern," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "You made that perfectly clear a long time ago. My life is none of your concern. Now please get out of my way. You're causing a scene." He looked back at his table. Serafina was watching them with a hawk's intensity, her expression a mixture of fury and smug satisfaction. The entire restaurant was pretending not to watch, but he could feel their stares. Panic set in. This was a PR nightmare, a business liability. But deeper than that, a raw, personal shame was clawing at him. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, and extracted all the cash. He had several $100 bills. "Here," he said, thrusting the money toward her. "Take this. Go home. I'll call you. We'll sort this out." Amelia stared at the money in his hand as if he'd offered her a snake. Her expression went from weary defiance to sheer, unadulterated contempt. She let out a short, bitter laugh that was completely devoid of humor. "You think you can fix this with money?" she whispered, her voice trembling, with a fury he hadn't heard since their final explosive argument. "You think you can just throw cash at me and make your guilt disappear? That's all you know how to do, isn't it? Nate, write a check, solve the problem." She looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time that night, he saw the full depth of her pain. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I wouldn't take a single cent from you if I were starving on the street. I learned my lesson. Your money always comes with a price, and I'm done paying it." With that, she pushed past him, shoving the heavy trolley through the kitchen doors with a resounding bang. Leaving him standing alone in the middle of the opulent dining room, a fistful of useless money in his hand, and the weight of her words crushing him. Returning to the table was one of the most difficult things Nathaniel had ever done. He felt as if a spotlight was trained on him, illuminating not his success, but a profound and very public failure. He slid back into his seat, the plush, leather feeling, cold and alien. The exquisite food on his plate now looked grotesque. Serafina was simmering. "That was quite the performance," she said, her voice dripping sarcasm. "Are you quite finished humiliating me, or is there an encore? It's not about you." "Serafina," Nathaniel said, his voice flat. He tossed the wad of cash onto the table. "Oh, it's always about me when I'm your date," she snapped. "What was that all about? Trying to pay off the charity case? Let me guess. She threw it back in your face. She always did have an ounce of pride and a pound of foolishness. He looked at her, then truly looked at her. He saw the hard, calculating glint in her eyes, the complete lack of empathy, the way she viewed Amelia's plight as a source of entertainment. And for the first time, he found her beauty repulsive. The perfect facade had cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. "I want to leave," he said, signaling for the waiter. "We haven't even had dessert," she protested. "I've lost my appetite." The ride back to his penthouse was a silent, suffocating affair. Serafina fumed furiously, texting on her phone, no doubt crafting a narrative for her friends, where she was the victim of his boorish behavior. Nathaniel stared out the window at the blurred city lights, but all he could see was Amelia's face, her eyes burning with contempt. "Your money always comes with a price, and I'm done paying it." What had she meant? The price of their divorce had been his freedom, his ability to pursue his ambition without hindrance. What price had she paid? He had given her financial security, or so he thought. He had walked away. What more could there be? The pregnancy. The thought hammered at him relentlessly. Who was the father? When had she met someone new? Had she been with someone right after their divorce? The thought sparked an ugly possessive jealousy that shocked him. He had no right to feel that way. He had relinquished all rights. Back in the sterile perfection of his penthouse, Serafina launched into a tirade. "I cannot believe you did that. Nathaniel, in front of everyone." Gerald Croft was at the next table. "Do you know how this looks? I don't care how it looks," he said, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city like a blanket of scattered diamonds. It was a view that usually made him feel powerful. Tonight, it made him feel hollow. "Well, you should. Your reputation is everything. Our reputation. And what about that? That woman. What's her story? Did she blow through all that money you gave her on some new boyfriend?" His memory flashed back again, this time to the end of their marriage. It wasn't one big explosion, but 1,000 small cuts. It was him cancelling dinner plans for a conference call. It was him forgetting their anniversary because of a product launch. It was the fight they'd had when she'd wanted to use some of their savings to open her bookstore. A bookstore? Amelia. Seriously, he had scoffed. "It's a passion project, a hobby. It's not a sound investment. We need to be focused on building real wealth, a real legacy. It's not about wealth." Nate. It's about a life she had cried, her face streaked with tears. "It's my dream." "Don't I get to have a dream, or do they all have to be yours?" The final fatal blow had come weeks later during a tense dinner. "I feel like you're not on my team anymore." He'd said, his voice cold and clinical. "All this emotional baggage, it's a distraction. I'm building an empire and I can't afford distractions." The hurt in her eyes had been bottomless. "A distraction. Is that what I am to you now? Your wife is a distraction." He had effectively told her that her heart, her dreams, her very being, were inconvenient to his ambition. He hadn't just divorced her, he had dismissed her. Nathaniel Serafina's sharp voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you even listening to me?" "I'm tired, Serafina. I think you should go." Her jaw dropped. "You're kicking me out. I need to be alone," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowed. Then she snatched her purse. "Fine. But when you come to your senses, don't think a simple apology and another piece of jewelry will fix this. You've made your choice. You've shown me that your pathetic ex-wife still has some kind of hold on you." She slammed the door on her way out, the sound echoing in the cavernous, empty apartment. He was alone, just as he'd wanted, but the silence offered no peace. It was filled with the ghost of Amelia, her quiet dignity a louder accusation than any of Serafina's shouting. The next morning, he couldn't work. The lines of code on his screen blurred. The market projection seemed meaningless. He kept seeing Amelia hoisting that heavy tray. He picked up his phone and called the one person he trusted implicitly, the man who had been with him since the beginning, his CFO and mentor, Alistair Finch. Alistair was old-school, a man of integrity and quiet wisdom, who had often served as Nathaniel's moral compass, a compass he had been ignoring for years. "Alistair," he said when the older man answered, "I need a favor." "It's personal." "Of course, Nathaniel. What is it? I need you to find out everything you can about Amelia Rosewood, my ex-wife." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Alistair had always been fond of Amelia. He had once told Nathaniel, "That woman is the bedrock, my boy. Don't ever mistake bedrock for ballast." "Is everything all right?" Alistair asked, his voice laced with concern. "No," Nathaniel said, the admission costing him. "No, it's not. I saw her last night. She's working as a busser at l'Orangerie. And Alistair, she's pregnant." The silence on the line was heavy. "Find out what happened," Nathaniel commanded, his voice strained. "The settlement money, where she's living, who she's with. Find out who the father is. I want to know everything. And be discreet. She can't know I'm looking into her." "I'll see what I can do," Nathaniel, Alistair said softly. Hanging up the phone, Nathaniel felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He was pulling at a thread, and he had a terrible feeling that it was attached to something that was about to unravel his entire carefully constructed world. 2 days passed in a haze of anxiety. Nathaniel was a ghost in his own life, moving through meetings and signing documents on autopilot. Serafina bombarded him with angry texts, which he ignored. His world had shrunk to a single gnawing question: what had happened to Amelia? On the third day, Alistair Finch requested a face-to-face meeting. The older man arrived at Nathaniel's penthouse office, not with a sleek tablet, but with a simple manila folder. His face was grim, his usual pleasant demeanor, gone replaced by an air of solemn gravity. "You asked me to be discreet," Alistair began, sitting opposite Nathaniel's vast obsidian desk. "It wasn't easy. She's covered her tracks well. She clearly wants to be left alone." Nathaniel leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Just tell me, Alistair." Alistair opened the folder. "The settlement. You wired it to her personal account. A little over $2 million. For the first 6 months, it remained untouched. Then there were 2 large withdrawals." He slid a bank statement across the desk. Nathaniel's eyes scanned the figures. The first withdrawal was for $800,000. The second, a few weeks later, for nearly $1 million. "What was this for?" Nathaniel asked, his voice hoarse. Her father, Alistair, said quietly. "Robert Rosewood. He was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of pancreatic cancer about 14 months ago. The standard treatments weren't working. There was an experimental program in Switzerland, astronomical costs, not covered by any insurance. Amelia paid for all of it. The treatment, the travel, the live-in medical care when he came home." Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs. He remembered Robert, a kind, gentle man, with a booming laugh who loved to garden. He had treated Nathaniel like a son. Amelia had adored him. She never told him her father was sick. She had faced it all alone. "Did he?" Alistair nodded grimly. "He passed away 6 months ago. The treatment bought him some time, a few extra months with his daughter. But in the end, it wasn't enough. The majority of the settlement was gone by then." Nathaniel stared at the paper, the numbers representing a daughter's desperate, selfless love. The money he had seen as a clean break she had used to fight for her father's life. The rest of it, he asked, dreading the answer. "Debts," Alistair continued, his tone methodical. "Her father, bless his heart, wasn't a great businessman. His small construction company had taken a hit during the recession. He'd taken out some high-interest loans to keep his men employed, leveraged against the family home. After he died, the creditors came calling. Amelia used the remainder of the settlement to clear the debts and save her mother from losing the house." Nathaniel leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. He felt sick. While he was buying diamond necklaces and planning trips to the Hamptons, Amelia was watching her father die and fighting off creditors to save her childhood home. And he had known nothing. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, he never once thought to simply ask if she was okay. She lost her job around the same time, Alistair added. She was a marketing manager at a mid-level firm. There were layoffs. With her savings gone and no income, she started selling off her things. First the car, then her jewelry, including her mother's pearls. Everything of value. She moved out of her apartment and into a small one-bedroom place in a much cheaper part of town. She's been picking up odd jobs ever since. The position at L'Orangerie is her third one in 4 months. Each word was a hammer blow to Nathaniel's conscience. He pictured Amelia, alone in a small apartment, grieving her father, her financial security shattered, forced to take grueling low-wage jobs to survive. He had to ask, the question that had been tormenting him for days. And the baby, he whispered, his throat tight. The father? Who is he? Alistair looked at him, his gaze direct and filled with a sorrowful understanding. He didn't need to consult his notes for this part. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a copy of a medical record summary obtained through a private investigator Alistair had been forced to hire. Amelia is 31 weeks pregnant, Nathaniel. The estimated due date is in late September. Nathaniel's mind raced doing the math. 31 weeks. That was just over 7 months. He cast his mind back, counting the weeks, the months. Back past the divorce finalization, back to a miserable rainy night in late December, almost 2 years ago. It had been a week after their final terrible fight where he had called her a distraction. He had been sleeping in the guest room. He'd come home late from the office, exhausted and full of regret. He'd found her in the living room, staring into the fireplace, looking lost. They hadn't spoken for days. Without a word, he had gone to her. It wasn't a reconciliation born of love or forgiveness, but of a desperate, lonely sorrow. A final fragile moment of connection in the wreckage of their marriage. They had made love a silent, heartbreaking act that felt more like a goodbye than a reunion. A week later, she had agreed to the divorce. He had assumed that night meant nothing, that it was just a final painful coda to their story. He looked down at the paper, his eyes finding the estimated date of conception. It was a date range of 3 days. The night he remembered fell squarely in the middle. The room began to spin. Alistair's voice seemed to come from a great distance. There is no new boyfriend, Nathaniel. There has been no one else. The private investigator confirmed it. She's been completely alone through all of this. Alistair let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Then he delivered the final devastating blow. The baby is yours, Nathaniel. The world didn't just tilt, it shattered. The carefully constructed edifice of his life, his justifications, his narrative of righteous ambition. It all came crashing down, burying him in the rubble of his own catastrophic selfishness. He had left his wife because he saw her as a distraction from building his legacy. And all this time, she had been alone, grieving, broken, carrying his real legacy inside her. A legacy he had abandoned without even knowing it existed. A son or a daughter he had almost left to be raised in poverty while he lived in obscene wealth. He dropped his head into his hands, a sound escaping his throat that was half sob, half gasp. The king was off his throne. The master of the universe was just a man face to face with the magnitude of his own failure. He hadn't just lost his wife, he had broken her, and in doing so, he had broken something fundamental within himself. The revelation didn't just change Nathaniel's perspective, it incinerated it. The man who walked out of that office was not the same man who had walked in. The hollow feeling was gone, replaced by a searing, all-consuming guilt that was so profound it was almost physical. He cancelled his meetings for the rest of the week. He didn't answer his phone. He barely ate. He just paced the length of his penthouse, the stunning city view, a mocking testament to everything he had prioritized over a human life, over his child's life. He saw it all with horrifying clarity now. Amelia hadn't told him about the pregnancy because she knew exactly how he would have reacted. He would have seen it as a complication, a liability. He would have thrown money at it, tried to manage it, to control it. He would have tried to buy his way out of responsibility, just as he had tried to do at the restaurant. Her silence wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of protection. She was protecting her child from the man he had been, and Serafina. The thought of her brought a fresh wave of revulsion. Her cruelty, her shallowness, her obsession with status. She was the living embodiment of the life he had chosen. She was the prize he had won for trading away his soul. She chose that evening to show up unannounced, using the spare key he had foolishly given her. She found him standing by the window, unshaven, in the same clothes from the day before, staring into the night. "Finally decided to emerge from your cave," she said, her voice sharp. She was dressed for an evening out, glittering and perfect. "I have a reservation at the summit. You owe me a proper evening, Nathaniel. People are talking." He turned to face her, and his expression must have been terrifying because she took an involuntary step back. "Give me the key." "Serafina," he said, his voice a dead calm. "What?" "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not playing these games with you. This isn't a game. We're finished. I want the key to my apartment." She stared at him, bewildered. "Finished over what?" "Because you had a little run-in with your pathetic ex." "Nathaniel, be reasonable. She's your past. I'm your future." "You're not my future." He said the words tasting like ash. "You're a symptom of my disease, a disease of greed and ego and blindness. I'm grateful to you in a way. You and that restaurant, you were the shock to the system I needed. You held up a mirror and I saw a monster." Her face twisted into a mask of fury. "A monster? I'm the best thing that ever happened to you. I elevated you. You were just a rich nerd before you met me. I gave you class. I gave you status. You gave me nothing of value," he shot back. "You cost me. You cost me time. You cost me money. And you nearly cost me my soul. Now give me the key and get out of my home. You'll regret this." She shrieked, her voice echoing in the minimalist space. "You'll come crawling back when you realize how empty your life is without me." "My life has been empty for years," he said, his voice raw with a pain she could never comprehend. "I'm just now realizing it." Defeated, she finally threw the key onto the marble floor, where it skittered with a tinny clang. "Fine. Have fun with your pregnant, destitute charity case. You two deserve each other." She stormed out, slamming the door for the final time. The sound was one of liberation. The gilded cage was open. But freedom meant nothing if he couldn't earn forgiveness. Not from Amelia, he knew that might be impossible, but from himself. He had to try. He had to do something. His first instinct was the old one: money. He could set up a blind trust for the child, millions of dollars. He could buy Amelia the finest apartment hire, a personal chef, a driver. He could eliminate every single one of her hardships with a few phone calls. But then he heard her voice in his head again. "You think you can just throw cash at me and make your guilt disappear?" She was right. Doing that wasn't for her, it was for him. It was the easy way out, an attempt to buy a clean conscience. It wouldn't require him to change, to face her, to be a father. It was the coward's way. He had to do this differently. He had to approach this with humility, something he hadn't felt in a decade. He found out her schedule from Alistair's report. Her shift at L'Orangerie ended at 11 p.m. He waited in his car parked down the street from the restaurant, feeling like a nervous teenager. When she emerged from the employee entrance, she looked even more tired than before. She walked slowly, one hand on the small of her back, toward the bus stop, a block away. He got out of his car and approached her slowly, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. "Amelia," he called out softly. She stiffened and turned her eyes immediately wary when she saw him. She clutched her worn handbag to her chest like a shield. "What do you want, Nathaniel?" she asked, her voice flat and exhausted. "I want to talk. Please. Not here. Can I give you a ride home?" "No arguments, no agenda, just a ride. It's late and you shouldn't be waiting for a bus." She hesitated, studying his face in the dim glow of the streetlight. He knew what he must look like. Disheveled, desperate. A far cry from the polished billionaire she'd seen a few nights ago. Perhaps that's what convinced her. "Fine," she said, her voice betraying her reluctance. "Just a ride." The drive was silent for the first few minutes. He drove carefully, hyper-aware of his precious cargo. He followed her quiet directions to a neighborhood he hadn't been in for years, a place of older walk-up apartment buildings and laundromats. It was a different universe from his penthouse. He pulled up in front of a modest red brick building. He turned off the engine and the silence in the car became profound. "Amelia," he began, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. "I know, about everything." She didn't feign ignorance. She simply stared straight ahead through the windshield. "How I had someone look into it. Alistair Finch." A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. "Of course, Alistair. He always was a good man." She turned to look at him, her gaze clear and searching. "So you know about my dad. You know about the money." He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "And I assume," she said, her voice dropping, "that you know about the baby." "Yes," he whispered, "I know." He finally met her eyes and let her see the raw, unvarnished guilt and shame he felt. "Amelia, why didn't you tell me about your father, about our child?" She let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a soul that had carried too much for too long. "Tell you," she said, her voice devoid of accusation, just filled with a deep, heartbreaking sadness. "Tell the man who called me a distraction. The man who told me my dreams were foolish hobbies. The man whose ambition was so big, there was no room left for me, let alone a sick parent or a baby." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't tell you because I knew you, Nate. The old you. You would have seen it as a problem to be managed, an obstacle. You would have tried to control it, to sanitize it, to write a check and make it go away. This baby, he deserves more than that. He deserves to be wanted, not managed." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "I was terrified. I was alone and grieving, and my world was falling apart. But this baby, he was the one thing that was purely mine. The one thing that your world of ambition and power couldn't touch or corrupt. I wasn't going to let you turn him into another line item on your balance sheet." Her words were not angry. They were simply the truth, and the truth cut deeper than any insult ever could. He didn't make excuses. He didn't defend himself. He just absorbed the full weight of her words, the indictment of the man he had been. "You were right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were right to protect him from me. I was that man. God, I was exactly that man." He paused, gathering every ounce of courage he possessed. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Amelia. I haven't earned that. I'm not asking for you back. I know I lost that right. I'm not even here with a plan or a solution." He turned to her, fully, his hands open and empty in his lap. "I'm here to ask a question. Is there anything at all I can do to start earning the right to be a father to our child? Not a benefactor, a father, on your terms. Whatever you say, whatever you need, I'll do it." Amelia looked at him for a long, long time, her expression unreadable. He saw the years of hurt, the wall she had built to protect herself, the deep exhaustion of her struggle. But for the first time, in the deepest recesses of her tired eyes, he thought he saw something else. Not forgiveness, not love, but a tiny, fragile flicker of something he had long since forfeited. A chance. The silence in the car stretched thick with the weight of Nathaniel's desperate plea. Amelia's gaze didn't soften, not immediately. It remained analytical, searching his face for any hint of the old Nathaniel the dealmaker, the strategist looking for an angle. He offered none. He simply waited, stripped bare of his usual armor of confidence and wealth, leaving only the raw, aching desire to atone. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but as firm as steel. "On my terms, you said." "Whatever they are," he affirmed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "All right," she said, taking a slow breath. "Term number 1. No more grand gestures. No surprise trust funds, no new cars, no penthouse apartments. If I need something I cannot provide myself, I will ask. You will not offer. You will not assume. You will not try to solve my life with your bank account. Am I clear?" "Perfectly," he said the word, feeling inadequate. Term number 2. This is about the baby, not about us. There is no us to fix Nathaniel. You burned that bridge, and I've learned to live on the other side. You are here on probation as the potential father of my child. That is the only role available to you. You don't get a vote on my life, my friends, or where I live. Each word was a precise, necessary cut, excising any hope he might have harbored for a simple reconciliation. It was painful, but it was fair. He nodded his understanding. "And term number 3, she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly as she looked down at her lap. "You have to show up. Not your assistants, not your drivers, not your money. You. Your time. That's the only currency I'm interested in anymore." She finally looked back at him. "If you can agree to that, you can drive me to my prenatal appointment on Thursday. It's at 9. She recited the address of a small community health clinic on the other side of town. It wasn't the private concierge medical service he would have booked. It was a place for regular people, with long waits and overworked staff. It was her reality. "I'll be there," he promised. "I'll be outside at 8. Without another word, she opened the car door and got out, leaving him alone. In the silence. He watched her walk into the nondescript building until the door closed behind her, a solitary, resilient figure, carrying the entire world he had almost missed. Thursday morning, Nathaniel was parked outside her building at 7:45 a.m., driving a modest sedan from his company's fleet, not his usual Bentley. He had traded his bespoke suit for a simple pair of dark trousers and a plain grey sweater. He was trying to be what she asked for, just a man, not a brand. When she emerged, she gave a short, surprised nod at his choice of vehicle and attire before getting in. The drive to the clinic was quiet but less tense than before. He asked her if she wanted to stop for breakfast. She hesitated, then said a simple cup of tea would be nice. He pulled into a small family-owned diner. It was another test. He sat opposite her in the worn vinyl booth, and for the first time in years, he simply listened. She spoke about the diner, how her father used to bring her here for milkshakes. She didn't talk about his death, but her memories of him filled the space between them. Nathaniel didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He just listened, letting her own the story, and realized how rarely he had done that when they were married. The clinic was exactly as he'd imagined, crowded, noisy, and smelling of antiseptic. The waiting room was filled with young couples, single mothers, and crying toddlers. He was acutely aware of his otherness, of the silent judgment in the eyes of a few people who recognized him from magazine covers. He felt a flash of the old annoyance, the instinct to demand a private room to pull rank. But he looked at Amelia, sitting calmly, with her hands folded over her belly, and he pushed the feeling down. This was her world. To be a part of her child's life, he had to be willing to enter it. When they were finally called back, the nurse, a kind of bustling woman named Martha, did a double-take when she saw him. "Mr. Pierce, what on earth?" "He's the father," Amelia said simply, cutting off any further questions. Inside the small examination room, Nathaniel stood awkwardly against the wall as Amelia was prepped for the ultrasound. When the doctor, a young, earnest man named Dr. Evans, applied the gel and the image flickered onto the small screen, Nathaniel forgot how to breathe. He saw a spine, like a tiny string of pearls, a head, the unmistakable shape of a tiny human being waving its arms. "There you go," Dr. Evans said, cheerfully. "Everything looks perfect. Strong limbs, good fluid levels. And here," he flipped a switch, and the room was suddenly filled with a rhythmic, powerful thumping. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. It was the single most profound sound Nathaniel had ever heard. It was the sound of life, of a future, of a heart beating in unison with its mother's. A heart he had co-created and then abandoned. Tears pricked his eyes, hot and sharp. This wasn't a liability. This wasn't a problem to be managed. This was his son, or his daughter. This was real. He looked over at Amelia. A tear was tracing a path down her cheek as well, but she was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile. Her eyes met his over the sound of their child's heartbeat, and in that shared sacred moment, one of his terms, "This is about the baby," not about us, felt impossibly beautifully blurred. The following weekend, he called her. "You said you needed to put together the nursery," he said, his voice hesitant. I'm pretty good with instructions. I could help, if you want." There was a long pause. "You know how to use a hex key? Pierce?" She teased a ghost of their old banter in her voice. "I built a multi-billion-dollar tech company from scratch. I think I can handle a crib." He showed up on Saturday morning to an apartment filled with flat-pack boxes. It was a small, clean space, sparsely decorated but filled with a certain warmth his penthouse lacked entirely. For the next 6 hours they worked. He shed his sweater, rolled up his sleeves, and wrestled with poorly translated instructions and bags of mysterious screws. He was clumsy. He put one panel on backwards, and he swore under his breath more than once, which made Amelia laugh, a real honest-to-God laugh. It was the most normal day he had spent in a decade. They didn't talk about the divorce, or Serafina, or Pierce innovations. They talked about whether the changing table should go against the wall or under the window. They argued playfully about the best color to paint the room. He favored a calming blue. She wanted a cheerful yellow. He ordered pizza from a local place, and they ate it, sitting on the floor amidst the cardboard and styrofoam. As he was tightening the final bolt on the newly assembled crib, Amelia's mother called. He could hear the strained, sharp tone of her voice through the phone. Amelia walked into the other room, but her voice carried, "Yes, he's here." "No, Mom, it's not like that. He's helping with the crib. Because I let him. I know what he did." "You don't think I know that? But he's trying. I have to think about the baby now." He felt a familiar sting of shame. Of course her mother hated him. He deserved it. He had hurt her daughter in the most profound way. The old Nathaniel would have seen this as a problem to solve, perhaps, by making a generous, anonymous donation to Mrs. Rosewood's favorite charity to smooth things over. The new Nathaniel stayed put. He finished his work on the crib, tested it for sturdiness, and began neatly stacking the empty boxes. When Amelia returned, her eyes were shadowed with the stress of the conversation. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she said quietly. "Don't be," he replied, looking at her directly. "She's right. I have a lot to prove, Amelia. Not just to you, but to everyone who loves you. All I can do is keep showing up." She just nodded, accepting his answer. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden rays through the window of the half-finished nursery, he knew it was time to go. He hadn't overstayed his welcome. He hadn't pushed for more. He had simply fulfilled his promise. "Thank you, Nate," she said at the door. It was the first time she had used his old nickname since the divorce. It landed in his chest with the weight of a pardon. "Anytime," he said. He walked away from her building feeling more accomplished than he had after any multi-million-dollar merger. He hadn't bought a solution. He hadn't engineered a result. He had simply shown up. He had used his hands, given his time, and shared a pizza on the floor. He was building something new, not with code and capital, but with hex keys and humility. It was the slow, painstaking architecture of hope, and he was finally learning how to read the blueprints. Nathaniel's journey was far from over. Redemption isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a road you choose to walk every single day. The story of what happened next, of the small, clumsy steps he took to prove he had changed, of Amelia's cautious struggle to trust again, and of the birth of their child, is a story for another time. But that night in that car, a fundamental shift occurred. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured by stock portfolios or penthouse views, but by our connections, our integrity, and our capacity for change. It's about realizing what truly matters before it's gone forever. If this story of a second chance and a hard-earned reckoning moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story with a real heart. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What do you think Nathaniel should do next to prove himself? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.